All right. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us for our first J. Robert Gladden Society Resident Fellow Assembly. I'm Justin Hicks. I'm a fourth-year resident here at WashU in St. Louis and one of the resident board members. We also have Josh Wright Chisholm. He's a fifth-year resident at the Hospital for Special Surgery and my co-resident board member. As we continue to increase diversity in the field of orthopedics, our goal is to increase resident retention and to provide tools to not only survive, but to thrive in residency. So we put together esteemed panelists to discuss some of the critical topics that we think will be helpful for medical students, residents, and fellows alike as we navigate orthopedic residency and beyond. We did receive some questions from you guys from our survey, as well as direct email. Feel free to post questions in our chat box, and Josh and I will make sure that our panelists address those. So first, we'll have Dr. Carson starting us out. He's a professor of orthopedic surgery here at Washington University in St. Louis. He's also the chair of orthopedics at the St. Louis VA Hospital and the current president of the J. Robert Gladden Society. This time, we'll open the floor to you now for a brief intro and presidential statement.
Thank you, everybody, for coming on today. This has definitely been an endeavor that we've put together from the J.R. Gladden Orthopedic Society. Just to say a little bit about the J.R. Gladden Society, we're essentially a multicultural organization, primarily Black and brown, of which we've put a focus on various aspects of what we feel are important in the field of orthopedics. This includes, as Justin's alluded to, retention. This is looking at recruitment. This is going all the way back to STEM programs. We have 2 STEM programs that we essentially support back for high school kids. Similarly, we're going to be doing an event at the Academy this year. We are under the auspice of the Board of Orthopedic Specialties under AOS, so we are under their umbrella. And in general, the J.R. Gladden Society is named after the first board-certified orthopedic surgeon, J. Robert Gladden, and we subsequently kind of pay homage to him in regards to helping in essentially creating a trail for all of us going forward. Some of the focuses for us going forward as an organization is networking, mentorship, sponsorship, but also facilitating, as I alluded to, some STEM programs for high school students, academic and research endeavors. We have over $100,000 of which we give out in research monies, but also we're looking and addressing healthcare disparities. We're an organization of medical students. Obviously, we're reaching back and we're touching high school students, but now the focus at this point in time is really on the orthopedic residents. And this is of the utmost importance in this new era where we have a lot of us all around the country. Some of us may be in programs where we're the one and only. And the goal of this is really to establish a network amongst all kind of residents across the country, not just Black and brown, but to establish a network across the country. So this is our inaugural event that we're putting forward. I'd like to personally thank Justin Hicks and Josh Wright Chisholm for 2 of my board members who have taken the initiative in putting this together today. This was an endeavor that they've taken on. This has been a dream of mine for quite a while of getting more young people involved in the J.R. Gladden Society. I'd also like to thank our faculty, Dr. Fufa, Dr. Dacus, Dr. Kojo, Dr. Swindell, and Dr. Lipa for contributing their expertise in helping facilitate resident education. We're going to talk about various aspects such as OITE. We're going to talk about fellowships and networking, but also career development and also the importance of research. So thank you very much, Justin and Josh, for giving me this 2 minutes to just kind of talk about us as an organization and the importance of really trying to get more and more young people involved. It's really critical. The larger the critical mass, we form a nice little family. We can then take care of each other. So thank you very much. And I'll turn this back to Justin and Josh. Thank you.
Okay, perfect, Dr. Carson. Thanks so much. Okay, so the first person we're actually going to have talk is going to be Dr. Shana Lipa. So Dr. Shana Lipa completed her undergrad at UCSD. She then completed medical school at UCSF. And then her residency at Harvard Combined Orthopedic Residency Program and her fellowship in spine at NYU. She is now a spine attending at Brigham and Women's Hospital and is the first female African-American spine attending at Brigham and Women's. She will be giving a talk about job placement And this will sort of be a panel where anyone else can feel free to jump in. There have already been some questions sent to Justin and I on this topic. So Shana, you can just kind of introduce yourself and then give us some insight on this. Thanks so much.
Of course, yeah. Thank you for having me, and thank you all for being here tonight. Haven't scrolled through yet, but I'm sure there are a bunch of familiar faces. So good to see you all on a Sunday. So in terms of job placement, career development, I think, a couple of key points to hit in that the majority of us for our academic career have spent our time in mostly academic environments. And so we don't really have an idea what's out there in terms of jobs, whether, in terms of private practice jobs and things like that. So, that's something to think about when you're going out. And the truth of the matter is that the majority of orthopedic surgeons actually do practice outside of an academic environment. So, it's something to look into. I don't think that, you need, and if you're early on in residency, I'm not saying you go look into that now. Of course, there are lots of other things that you have to do. But when you start getting into your later years in residency, start thinking about a practice model that you want to be in. And so within that, like I said, there's academic, private practice, and then managed care systems like Kaiser, if you guys are familiar, that's pretty big on the West Coast. And so all of those come with different requirements. So I think, think about what type of requirements you're looking to have in your job in addition to your clinical requirements, right? So in terms of academics, they're going to be usually research requirements and also requirements for some type of society involvement, whether it's on a regional level, national level, et cetera. And so you have to think about those things. And then always, even in academics, you should think about what the reimbursement model is, because a lot of that, even academic centers and orthopedics run like private practices in terms of they're based on productivity. Some of them could be salaried, but a lot of them are based on productivity. So you think about that. And then when you're in private practice, and you're looking at jobs, you want to think about who owns the practice. Is it the partners, or is it people like private equity? Because that's happening a lot now too. And that's if you look into orthopedics, you're going to read a lot about private equity owned practices, and private equity, they're buying up a lot of practices, particularly orthopedics, because it's a big moneymaker. So you want to think about who owns the practice. And if you're looking at a job that's owned by partners, one of the questions you want to ask them is, are they planning on selling to private equity anytime soon? Because that's something you want to know. Because if you're thinking about becoming a partner, because there are some financial incentives in that as well, obviously, and your practice is sold into private equity before you are able to become a partner, then you don't benefit from whatever the shares are. So you want to ask those questions when you're looking at jobs. And also, if you're in private equity setting, think about whether they have other resources available to you, like buy-in to ambulatory surgical centers and whatnot. So those are the things that you think about. And like I said, overall, still always think about the reimbursement model. Some people are on a straight collections-based model where it's based off of what insurance comes in, insurance or private pay and whatnot. And then some people are reimbursed based off their RVUs. So you want to think about those things. But overall, like you do in residency, what I would suggest, if you're a medical student applying to residency or applying to fellowship, or if you're thinking about jobs, it all depends on what your wants are. So you sit down and you obviously make a pros and cons list and think about that. And for some people, it's going to be based on location, and some people it's going to be based on more along the type of practice that they would like to be in. So overall, like anything you've done before, you want to sit down and make a pros and cons list. A couple things that I would recommend regardless of where you want to be, think about your partners. That's going to be one of the most important things. That's what a lot of people told me over time. And when I was looking for jobs, they're like, you're going to spend a lot of time with these people. So you want to have good partners. And if there is sometimes you may be the only surgeon that's doing the specialty that you're doing in your practice if you're in a smaller practice. So you might be the only spine surgeon or the only joint surgeon. But if there are other people in your practice that are in your specialty, then you really want to try to get to know if there's someone that you could bounce cases off of, right? Because when you're starting off practice, you're not going to know everything. So you want to see if you're going to be able to bounce cases off of a person that's, maybe more like a mentor model that's doing the same specialty as you. If not, it's not the end of the world, because you always are going to be reaching out to your previous mentors from residency and from fellowship, but at least you want to know if there are people there that it's a good working environment between you and those people in the practice. And then other things I will say are important. I think a very important point for everyone in this stage is that regardless of where you went to residency or fellowship, just know that your reputation matters in terms of applying for jobs. So if you're applying for jobs, your reputation matters for residency and for fellowship, not just from where the last place you were, because people will reach out and they will ask about you. It's a small orthopedic world. So if someone knows one of your residency attendings, they'll reach out and ask about you there. And obviously the same for fellowship. So it's not just, your reputation is not just important in fellowship, but also where you work for training. So I just would say, think about those things, because all those things will follow you over time. And the last thing to say about jobs and career development is that 50% of orthopedic surgeons change their jobs within 2 years. Like so you have to be in the same place for 22 months for your boards. And the truth of the matter is that 50% of people change a job after 2 years, and that's okay. So what you thought you may have liked in the beginning may be different. But just know that if that is the case, then you're not alone. Half the other people that have come out in your class have done the same thing.
Hey, Dr. Lieber, thank you so much. That was awesome. We have actually a lot of questions that were sent particularly about this.
Okay.
And it was, I'll kind of go in order of the ones in which they sent. So the first question was this: when did you specifically start identifying where you wanted to be? And when in general would you recommend that a resident start thinking about where they would like to be ultimately?
Yeah, good question. So I thought about different practice models, like I said, but I pretty much narrowed it down that I wanted to be in academics, because I do like the teaching the residents and fellows, and you could be in a private practice model and still do that. But I liked that, and I liked the research and the research resources, and just kind of, a lot of the involvement in the academic societies. And like I said, you also could do those things in private practice, but overall, I kind of felt like I wanted to be in academics, also wanted to be very visual in terms of in spaces where I could see a lot of residents and fellows. So that was probably a little bit of my reason for being academics as well. And so I identified the practice model I wanted to be in pretty early on in residency, maybe like settled it down like third year or so. And then in terms of exactly where I wanted to be, I was kind of open. I'm from California, so I was like, okay, let me look back there and see if there's anything that I like. But overall, the reason why I settled and the job that I settled is because I have extremely good mentors, and they've been good to me throughout residency and fellowship, and really have supported me. And so I think that is extremely important, at least for my goals and whatnot. So they're very supportive, and I thought that it would be a good career advancement for me.
I got you. So a lot of residents, for instance, who may want to stay at their home institution or the institution where they trained, it can be difficult for them to start those conversations.
Yeah.
Did you initiate those conversations? Were those conversations initiated with you? How'd you go about that process?
Right. So I think that's a good question. I think if you know you want to stay on, and this goes back to part of the question I didn't answer earlier, but if you know you want to stay at your home institution, I think you should start having those conversations early on. I don't think you need to wait until the end of fifth year or even fellowship. I think once you match into the specialty you match into, or even if before that, if you're 100% sure that you're going into that specialty, you could start having those conversations early. If for some reason you want to stay. And for me, I actually was keeping my options open, but my chair, right before I left, approached me about it. And so I knew that it was a possibility, and I knew it was a possibility early on, even before I started fellowship. So I started thinking about when I knew. I asked him, I said, okay, what are the research requirements that you want, or what are, all the requirements that you want? Is there a specialty you want me to like settle into, or is it open to where I could do what I could do in spine? Because some people, they're like, oh, I want a deformity person, I want this, or I want that. And so once I knew that was a possibility, that they were like, we want you to come back here, I started asking them all the questions and then weighing all the other options against that. So I think, that's something, if you already know you have a job and you're like, okay, or a job offer, and you're like, okay, this is pretty ideal, but let me see what else is going. So you can kind of weigh the pros and cons against that. But I think overall, if you want to stay, it's a good thing to bring it up early on, wherever you are, whether that's in residency or in fellowship. If you know you're somewhere early on in fellowship and they have a job opening or somewhere you want to be, I would start having those conversations really early.
Awesome. Good to know. Okay. There's another question about compensation, which you did touch on, but this is one that I think, something I've had myself, and there's another resident who asked this question. How do you get the true financials on a job offer? And how do you understand how they, your first 2 or 3 years may be different than what you may expect to earn years 5 through 7. And I'm also open to any other attendees who are on the line who can help kind of shine some light on that. Thank you.
Right. I think that's a good question. I think to bring up another topic is, one, you should figure out what your first 2 or 3 years look like. Some people will have a guarantee for 2 years or 3 years. Like my job, I have a guarantee for 2 years. I'm able to extend it to 3. When I was talking to one of my co-fellows, he said he has a guarantee for 6 months. After that, he's off with the guarantee. Right. So you should understand how long your guarantee is. Yeah. And then the other thing is, you can certainly talk to other people in your practice about what they're looking like at 3 years, what they're looking like at 5 years, what they're looking like at 7 years. I would say that most people should be open about that. If they're not, then that's a little bit of a red flag. I will say, because there are jobs that have, that's a very good question to ask, because there are jobs I've known that people have got, like, oh, you're starting off at 900,000, but you have to ask, like, what actually, that's not a guarantee in a sense, because what does that actually look like in terms of what they expect you to bring in? Because if you're not bringing in the productivity, even if you're in your first couple of years and it's not a true guarantee, then you go into the hole. And you don't want to, so you really want to figure out if this is like a guarantee without you having to meet certain productivity, or if it's a guarantee by name, but you have to be productive in a sense. So those are the things that I would ask. And like I said, if you should ask people to show you, especially, you have partners that are younger partners, start asking them, how much are you making at 3 years, right? How much are you making at 5 years? And then you could ask the older partners further along. And I think those are all good questions, or reasonable questions to ask. You shouldn't be afraid to ask about money.
And if you're inexperienced,
I would add is the concept of Josh Dunyan. The only other thing to talk about this is what the buy-in is, and the buy-in is actually kind of a little confusing, because you can essentially come into a job where they pay you a lot of money up front, and you have to understand, to start a practice, it's usually 1.5 times the amount that it costs. That's malpractice, that's marketing, that's all the various facets that go into getting your practice started. So they're taking a risk on you. Then you get to the point of, arguing about salary versus buy-in. Now, some will have essentially huge buy-in. So there's a particular institution around the country where the buy-in is $2 million. You come up with $2 million, whether it's through a bank or whatever it is. It's a particular institution in Philadelphia. It's $2 million buy-in. And for all partners, that's when you become a partner after 3 years, it's $2 million. So that sounds a little extravagant, but when you look at the returns of what that $2 million brings, you have to there's a lot of weighing that you have to do. So looking at, I think, as Shana says very clearly, the amount they're going to pay up front, what is that actually entailing? But also you have to look down the line in regards to what the potential buy-in. There's a group in Atlanta where the buy-in is at $1, but essentially they're going to pay you a lower amount of money at the beginning. And essentially they're making your buy-in essentially is your low income. They're essentially making money off you from the beginning. So that's the other part of looking at the whole job situation. It's not always the money up front, and it's not always the money on the back end. You have to look at all of them. So I'm sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, that's very good.
Can I just add one thing? This is Dr. Ross. First
Dr.
of all, phenomenal crew. Most of us on this call, and the people you just heard from, have learned these things from experience. Most of the folks in this call, and you, if you're transitioning from residency to fellowship or fellowship to career, you're not going to know enough about the things we just talked about. Don't try and do this by yourself. You need people to help you. You need to hire people to help you. The best money that you can spend, coming from even residency to fellowship and fellowship to your career, is to spend it on a healthcare or health law attorney, a tax accountant, and a straight up accountant. They actually need to be different. And I actually posted a list of people that you need to have in contact with. And this is actually, there's a book, a great resource by Dr. Bonnie Simpson Mason that talks about all of this stuff. It's actually on the New York Times bestseller list. Do not think that from this call, you're going to have enough information to make great decisions. You should get enough information to know that you need to get some help making great decisions. And you'll do that. And you got a ton of resources here. These folks who just gave you information that's gold will still be available to you as you navigate this process. But get people to help you. Do not sign or evaluate a contract unless you have some experts who have helped you roll through that. I cannot stress that enough. All of us have horror stories. My first 2 contracts were trash because I was so excited about having a job as an orthopedic surgeon and I just wanted to sign. And these are people that I knew. These contracts were terrible. My last contract was amazing, but it's 5 contracts later. My goal for all of you on this call is to start off with the best thing that you can, get help, pay for it, and be happy with the fact that you are investing in yourself early.
Yep, and the one thing to go along with that is I will say don't take the first offer. In terms of like you may take the offer at that job, that first job that you interviewed at, but that's not what I mean. Don't take the first offer in terms of salary, in terms of signing bonus, negotiate that. Because they know that we're excited. We probably haven't seen a check like this ever, right? And so you should do the work,
Yeah.
right? Don't take the first offer. Always negotiate that.
Okay, awesome insight. Dr. Libby, can you share who helped you kind of navigate those muddy waters the way that Dr. Ross was describing?
Yep. So I had people from both residency and fellowship I reached out to, and I know I was asking them about money and about requirements, just other requirements outside of money, like I said, like whatever it's publications or society involvement, all those things that sometimes happen in academics. And I reached out to attendings there, and also your co-fellows. Your co-fellows are going through this at the same time that you are, and right, especially the people that are doing your same specialty. They have an idea. You have an idea of how much they're getting paid and what their RVU rate is. So you have an idea of what's going on in the market right at that time. So I had 4 co-fellows. So, and people were applying to jobs around the country. So I knew what their starting salary was. We were very open about that. I really think that I think we try not to talk about money, but I think it's important to talk about money because we should know what people are getting paid and what they're negotiating, because you want to be able to negotiate those things too. And even in terms of contract lawyers that deal with a lot of medicine, that's who you should really focus on. A contract lawyer that deals with medicine, they're going to know what the market salary is too. So you can also talk to them.
Awesome, good. Okay, we have a couple more questions. One of the question was, how do you negotiate OR time? And is that something that you negotiate?
Yes, and yes. So I will. That's a good question, and that is something you should negotiate. Right? Like how many days guaranteed in the OR, which days you're going to be operating. Now, to be honest, if you're in a very busy practice and you're coming in new and most people don't want to operate on Friday, you're probably going to be operating on Friday. But that doesn't mean you can't negotiate. It doesn't mean you should just say, oh, I'm probably going to be operating on Friday, so I'm not going to tell them I don't want to operate on Fridays, right? It's just that people don't like to operate at the end of the week because they want to go out of town, et cetera. But I think that all these things are up on the table. You should bring up how many guaranteed OR days you have and which day, if there's a preference for days, because at the end of the day, what can they say? They could say no. But I think that, you do have to think about that, and you have to think about how busy your practice is, because some people will come in with only 1 guaranteed OR day, and eventually you probably want to do 2 to 3 OR days. So you need to figure out what that looks like. How do you get there? Is there space for you to grow in that space? So that's a really good question. And the other thing, I guess, to think about is it depends on what your specialty is, but is there OR days at a main site where your sick patients are going to be, and then like more to ambulatory care center if you're doing something like that where you're able to work into both, because that also matters. So you should find out what the OR day and availability looks like in both those places.
The other thing negotiation wise is your resources that are going to be available to you, whether it's a PA or NP or medical assistants. You really need to have help when you're going into a practice. So some people want a PA right off the bat. Understand, if you get a PA or NP right off the bat, that's going to cost. That goes to your cost center. So until you're really up to speed, you really want to probably negotiate something in at either whatever the time frame you want to set it at, a year or 6 months, where someone is dedicated to kind of help you develop your practice.
Yeah. And I think one more thing to go along with that is administrative assistant. Well, you should figure out who is going to be answering your calls at your office and returning those calls, because that's very, very important. So like you said, whether it's going to be your PA doing that, or you're going to have a separate administrative assistant calling and booking cases and things like that, you should figure out who all your helpers are going to be.
Excellent. Here's a question I really like. Someone said, what can I do right now in residency to make myself the best possible job applicant?
Well, I think that's probably similar to what you're going to do to make yourself in the best possible best possible applicant for fellowship, right? People are probably looking at the same things. They want to look at it. It depends on what type of practice setting you're going to. If you're going to an academic setting and think about going to academic place, they're probably going to look at what your research are, what your involvement is, what the presentations are that you're doing, and like the quality of those things. And then if you're going into private practice, they're probably not looking at those things as much, but I think that people still do look at those things. So I think the things that are going to make you look very good on paper, whether it's for for fellowship or for a job, are probably similar. Now, I do think we're going to talk about networking, which is, to me, one of the most important things, and we're going to get into that. But if you know somebody's at a practice, going to be at a meeting that's at a practice that you really want to be at, you have to go and show yourself and introduce yourself. Let them know. I don't think it's bad to say, hey, I'm really interested in your practice, be forward about those things. So I think that in addition to what looks good on paper, people like to meet you face to face, right? They want to know who they're going to work with. So if you know that somehow someone's going to be there at a certain society meeting or whatnot, show yourself, make yourself available. And I think those are the good things to do.
Awesome. Honestly, that was a great talk, Dr. Lipa. We have basically like 1 more minute left if anyone else wants to chime in. But I was, we have 1 more minute left. I was going to have Dr. Fufa on next, but I don't know if anyone else wanted to chime in. A lot of good stuff covered right there, though.
Yeah, that was a lot, and I appreciate all the questions, and that was actually a good talk. So thanks for having me.
Honestly, really appreciate you. Okay, all right, Dr. Fufa, I'm gonna grab the screen right now, and then we will share your stuff right now. Okay.
Well, it is a real pleasure to be here with everybody this evening. In particular, I want to thank Justin and Josh for inviting me to join this panel, and Dr. Carson, obviously, for the leadership of this great society. Josh was kind enough to put together a few slides just to help guide me with regards to the questions that he knew are kind of burning for this audience, but we'll zip through these kind of quickly with just some of our general thoughts on the topic that you've already heard about in the first session, but talking and now focusing on mentorship and networking for the next few minutes, and then obviously leave it open for questions. And Justin and Josh, feel free to interrupt me and jump in when there's questions that are relevant.
Sorry, Dr. Fufa, I actually didn't give you a proper introduction. So Dr. Duretti Fufa is a hand surgeon in the Hospital for Special Surgery. She completed her undergrad at Harvard, medical school at Harvard, and residency at HSS. She then did her hand fellowship at WashU, and then a plastic surgery fellowship in Taiwan. Am I correct, Dr. Fufa?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so she also serves as a program director for the residency at Hospital for Special Surgery, and for me personally as a mentor. And so thank you so much for coming on today.
My pleasure. So by way of sort of summary of what we hope to kind of cover, and this just to stimulate your mind with regards to questions that you have on any of these topics, defining what is mentorship and networking, why it's so important, why you need one in the stages of training where many of you are in residency and fellowship, how you might find mentors to help support you on this pathway, and how to leverage these relationships to turn them into things that can help you in the stages of your career that were just discussed, like finding a job, negotiating, all of those that come after the stage that you guys are in now. So by way of definition, mentors can be seen as sort of, the wise sage that you look to for advice and for giving you assistance. Originally, I'm a fan of the Greeks, so mentor is a character from Greek mythology, and Odysseus from the Odyssey, when he went to fight in the Trojan War, he left his son in the guidance of mentor, which is where the phrase mentorship came from. And so, in some ways you can think of it like a surrogate parent, somebody to give you guidance. With regards to the topic, bringing it to more relevant to us in medicine, we often think of mentors as people who have influence personally and professionally to help us grow in our careers. Why do we need mentors? I think that a lot of people understand the value of mentorship in this day and age, but some specific things to help get through residency. Residency is a challenging time for everybody, but I think, we don't even just have to think it these days. Evidence suggests that it's even harder for people who are non-white and non-male. And so mentors can help support you in terms of knowing and advocating for you. If you're lucky enough to find a mentor who does look like you and share some affinity, they also can, speak up on your behalf. They can share with you, sort of when you sort of think something's going on that's strange, you can feel comfortable to approach them, and they can share their experiences, so you might not feel like you're the only person going through things, which we guarantee you are not. Mentors can also help you get in the door, as was talked about previously. They open doors for you. That's sort of like the distinction between a mentor and, as we've talked about, sort of the guidance, the sage, the assistance, and a sponsor or a champion. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. I'll touch on that again a little bit later too. But another role that a mentor may have, other than just providing you guidance, is to really help and facilitate opening up doors for you, to give you opportunities. To help you do it your way I think, speaks to the importance of having multiple people who you consider as mentors, because no one person is going to be the one guide that you can use for all aspects of your career, of your personal life, of your clinical specialty. There's so many facets to what we do. And so when you find people who you have some affinity to, and I think in terms of finding mentors, that's one great place to start, is kind of affinity groups. What affinities do you have? Is it being a female? Is it from being from a specific geography? Is it from having, played a specific sport? Is it from having had a certain experience? Is it from having a similar ethnic or cultural background? The more connections that you can make, I think the stronger that these that your network can become. And networking, tying this into the topic of mentorship, networking really is just building connections. And the more connections that we have, this also is very much evidence-based. The more connections that we have, the more, the stronger we will be. The stronger we'll be when we are in periods of challenge, because we have more support. The stronger we'll be because we have so many more domains or limbs that we can kind of lean on when we need that support. And so the more mentors that you have, the more that you can find people who can help support whatever the domain or aspect that you're talking about, be it the topic we just talked about in terms of finances. There may be people who you've seen their practice model, or it may somehow be parallel to the ones that you're considering, and those are going to be obvious people who you may be able to lean on to ask the types of questions that were just raised. But that may not be at all the same person who may provide you guidance with regards to preparing for a challenging case that you're going to have, early in your practice. So you're going to more than likely need a broad network of people to help support you in all these different dimensions that we know your careers are going to have. Mentors, how to find mentors. I mentioned a little bit, sort of what affinities you have. And I also mentioned, how you may have mentors for different reasons. And Josh also points out here, mentors come in all shapes and sizes, and they're not always going to look like you, and that's fine. I find it so interesting. Josh put these slides together for me. I'm going to seam the story that I planned for these three individuals who you put on here, and I'm curious. At some point, I'll know how you chose these three individuals for me.
I think this is a pretty good three. I was actually going to say I really wanted you to discuss your relationship with all three, because I think it's a different relationship, and I think they each have different important parts in your career. That's why I thought it was really, I thought it was important to discuss these three men in particular.
There could be a million photographs here, and that's to speak to the importance of having a network. And, it may feel overwhelming at the beginning. I totally remember being there. Josh and I have talked about this a ton. Particularly through the first few years of residency, sort of wondering, like, when am I ever going to be a part of this club? When am I ever going to fit in? When am I ever going to have somebody, when am I ever going to feel like I belong here? Just little by little, making connections of one thing or another helps you get there. Interestingly, Dean Lorich, who's the bottom right photograph here, and actually this is a really meaningful time of year with regards to him, because Josh, I don't know if you know this, he Dr. Lorch took his life
December 10th, yeah.
Yeah, on the day after our annual faculty holiday party. It was the Sunday afterwards, and we had that party last night, actually. But yeah, Dr. Lorch took his life, unfortunately, 4 years ago, almost exactly this time of year. Dr. Lorch was the faculty with whom I rotated as a medical student when I came to visit HSS, and really functioned, I would say, kind of as a, well, definitely tough love. That's another thing that's about these relationships with regards to mentorship. It's a two-way street. Josh mentions this on the next slide, and we'll talk about it again. It's a give and take relationship, and not all parts of it are going to be pleasant. You take some licks along with getting the guidance, the support, having somebody have your back. Scott Levin on the left is the chair of orthopedic surgery. He's dual boarded in plastics and orthopedic surgery. And, how did I find him as a mentor? I cold called this guy, basically. I walked up to him at a hand society meeting. I had this idea that I wanted to kind of be an orthoplastic surgeon, and he is the sort of father of orthoplastic surgery. And I walked up to him and I essentially said to him, I'm really interested in developing the skill set that you have. I come from an orthopedic background, and I would just love any advice that you have to get me there. And so I think for me, Dr. Levin is like the classic definition of a mentor. I asked him, how do I get to be like you? And thankfully, because his passion for orthoplastics is so great, he really, laid the pathway for me. But again, getting to the point of this being a two-way street, he told me, you need to get training. I think that the best place for you to get that training is in Taiwan. And I moved myself to Taiwan for a year to do a second fellowship after hand fellowship. But by asking for his advice and taking his advice, even to the tune of kind of sending my life in a slightly different pathway than I was expecting, he has been such an advocate for me ever since then. He made me the program chair for our hand society meeting, and he, when you find a mentor who gives you advice, listen to it. If you go to a person whose career path or whose model or whatever you want to follow is, listen to them, and they will pay you back. And that's been a really important relationship for me from a pretty pure and classic mentorship sense. Riley Williams.
Dr. Fufa, do you mind if I interrupt something really quickly and ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay, so I know this is just a quite lingering question myself. So on this previous slide, we kind of had do it your way. And this is something I think a lot of residents struggle with. We frequently get different advice about where to go to fellowship, where to rank things, what to go at. Obviously, we have our own ideas about what's right. And Dr. Carson and I were actually just talking about this before the call. What advice do you have for residents and fellows who may disagree with one of the strongest mentors' advice? How would you navigate that space?
Yeah, I think you have to, that's a really great point. And I've been in that situation as well. It was a very wise and sage mentor of mine who told me I should not take on the role of residency program director, and obviously listen to his advice. That's the most salient example that comes to my mind. I think that you have to confront it head on. If you make a decision that doesn't align with that which the mentor or guide has suggested for you, you should address to them the reason, the rationale that you have. I shouldn't have said, if they give you advice, you should take it. It doesn't mean that you take every single piece of advice that they give you. So I'm glad that you doubt that's not always going to vibe with what you have planned for your future, or for various reasons. The most obvious reason is that they don't know everything about you and all of the facets and domains. And so I think when you come back to that mentor and explain what the reasoning behind your very thoughtful decision making smooths that path. But I think that can be challenging, right? It feels maybe uncomfortable to address it head on. You might feel like instead just tucking your head down and maybe fracturing that relationship, I'll just go a different direction. But I think forcing yourself to have that challenging conversation. Number one, you put yourself through the exercise of having really been thoughtful about your decision making, but then sharing that with the mentor, I think will go a long way.
The only thing I'll add to your comment is, I've had similar discussions, and we all find we trust our mentors in decisions in making. Now, sometimes our mentors have other plans for us, and that's where we tend to stray a little bit. And I'm supposed to be a chairman of a department. Dr. Lorenzen's convinced I should be dean and president of a school. I'm not interested in doing that. So it is a hard discussion to have with a mentor and someone you trust. Now, in saying that, I've definitely taken some of the directions that he's wanted me to go in, but it is a challenging thing. It really is, Dreddy. It's a challenging thing with a mentor that you truly trust. And again, a lot of our mentors have ambitions and goals for us that may not necessarily ally with our families and everything else and what we want to do. And we may not want to make that same personal sacrifice.
Yeah, totally agree. And that I think also speaks to the reason why it's so important to have multiple mentors, because you can bounce these things off different people. When you rely on one voice all alone, it may seem even more daunting to kind of confront those things. Josh, how do you want to spend the last couple minutes here?
We can kind of quickly. Honestly, I've really been enjoying the whole talk, so we can quickly go through a couple of things. You were actually going to talk about your relationship with Dr. Williams. I think that might be insightful too.
Yeah, Riley Williams is one of our sports medicine doctors. No specialty overlap here, but he was a faculty mentor to me when I was in residency. And this, here he's a real example of a champion or a sponsor. Dr. Williams had the role of our residency selection chair for many years, and he has for many years taken the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusivity in our selection process very seriously. And when he was stepping down from that role, he was very intentional about wanting to put somebody in that role who had a similar lens, and gave me the opportunity to take that on at a relatively early stage in my career. And then having that leadership role led to more opportunities, probably, even all the way up to becoming residency program director. And so, whereas, Riley Williams isn't somebody who I go chum up with, or he's not checking in on me from time to time, but what he did is drop this very big opportunity in my lap. And that opened many doors for me for the future from a leadership perspective.
I'll just add one line to that. Riley makes it very clear that he is not a mentor. As many students, and he does, he makes it very clear, but he mentors in his own way, which is very clear. I mean, Riley is not that person where he's warm and fuzzy with students and everything else, but I mean, he has mentored so many different people. And I joke with him all the time that I tell him he's an incredible mentor. And he says, no, you're Eric, you're the mentor. I just do what I do. I'm the Charles Barkley. When Charles Barkley said, I'm not out here trying to be an example for other basketball players, that's who Riley says he is. And he is truly an example.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's funny though. Okay.
I do have a question, Dr. Fufa, if you don't mind. Thanks so much for the stage advice. One question that came up was, what are strategies to maintain relationships, particularly after you've left an institution, whether that be graduating residency or finishing your fellowship? Do you stay connected?
Yeah, Josh made some notes on some of these topics, and he did make some notes on this, which I think are great. And that is to say, the relationship should continue as best that you can. I found it so meaningful when prior resident students who, they don't act with us at HSS, they go somewhere else, they check back in and they say something like, oh, I did a distal radius today, and it, made me think about being in the OR with you, or you write a letter of recommendation for somebody for some award or grant, and then they, follow up with you and tell you what they did with it. So even, maintaining a relationship, particularly in this day and age, doesn't necessarily have to come with a tremendous amount of effort, but to let them know that you remember the support that they gave you, I think can go a long way by something as simple as an email. But to be able to collaborate with them potentially in the future, so you start to develop yourself and your interests, and where you see an opportunity to potentially build on one of their research interests and collaborate, that would be a great way to continue to strengthen the relationship as well. Or just, providing them with updates about what's been going on in your career, the strikes, the gutters even, and that's another way to draw continue connections with people.
Dr. Fufa, thank you so much. So I'm going to get into some of our questions right quick. So most of our questions actually were kind of related to this last little slide. So the second part says pick your spots. I think most medical students, residents, fellows, all of us do have this concern about annoying a mentor, bothering too much. We don't know when to ask. How do you pick your spots? And this question is open to any of the attendings on the call. How do you pick your spots of when you leverage these relationships and ask for a significant ask?
Well, I think, one thing to say is like many hands make light work, right? So again, the network, not having this one person who you go to or have to ask for every single thing is important. So then you can distribute the asks that you have. Similarly, understanding the priority. And well, one thing I would say for personally is like, give them tons of time. Like I think the best thing you can do for your mentor with respect to this kind of thing is give time to them to be able to accomplish the ask commensurate with the size of the ask. So it is very hard to, get approached for support, sponsorship, advocacy, whatever it is that my mentees may need from me. If that timeline is like in the next 24 hours, I need you to do this. But if they say like, hey, over the coming months, my fellowship interviews are going to be coming up. I, have like 2 top programs. Do you happen to know anybody there? It would be great, for you to be able to help me if you have the opportunity. So time, I think, appreciating, like you said, that their time is going to be limited, trying to give them as much time as possible. The other is to set them up. Like if you're asking for somebody to reach out to somebody on their behalf, provide them with the name, the email address, make it simple for them to connect with the people who you're asking them to advocate for you. A couple of tips.
That's huge. I haven't even thought about that. Okay, this was a lot of insightful stuff. Actually, we're a couple minutes ahead of time. Sorry, a couple minutes behind. Are there any more last minute questions or any more insight that some of the attendings want to give before Dr. Dacus goes next? Okay.
Now, the last advice I'll just give is, the relationship between mentee and mentor. I mean, obviously, I've mentored a lot of you all. And then it's the graduation from mentorship to sponsorship, which is really the critical part of a lot of our careers as we go forward. I think Reddy said it very well. I think for me personally, we all are very, very, very busy people. And, and I can't get back to texts or emails right away. There has to be a certain amount of persistence that goes along with it. Second rule that I have now is the fact that if I'm going to take time and mentor you, at least engage me in some discussion about what your plans are. I think Reddy said that very well in regards to discussing with your mentor your plans. And my third rule is I'm getting old. And I ask if I'm going to be mentoring students now or residents or fellows, is I ask them to give back to 1 or 2 people or as many people as I can, because I think it's really a family here. And I think it's really critical that we expand on what we do. Mentoring for a lot of us that are on the line today is really critical in regards to what we do. We do it on our free time. And so it's really important to us. And, I think the more mentors we have, more sponsors we have, the better off we're going to be and expand our numbers.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Carson. Thank you, Dr. Fu, for another great talk, Fro. Thank you, Fro.
Awesome. And so next we have Dr. Rashad Dacus. He is currently the chief of the hand division at the University of Virginia. He also served as the residency program director from 2011 to 2019, also at UVA, and also as the vice chair for diversity and wellness. So he's primed and perfect to share with us about resident health and wellness. And I'll turn things over to you, Dr. Dacus.
Hi, everybody. Wellness has kind of become a thing where it was a lot like DEI. It became a buzzword at some point, and in the evolution of that and kind of what has happened, I think COVID has kind of brought some of these things to light as well. But people kind of neglect the residents a lot of times in this stuff, and being a program director, as Dr. Fufa is as well, you understand a lot that the residents their struggles a lot of times go along with their wellness stuff. So I'll kind of go forward here. I do some DEI stuff with J&J, and I'm with the ODLC, which is the Orthopedic Diversity Leadership Consortium. I do the professional development part for that. So basically, any people who have DEI roles, we kind of help with that part of it. So why wellness matters? So I tell residents all the time, because it's true. Like, no one feels bad for an orthopedic surgeon. Nobody. You're sick, whatever happens, you hurt yourself, whatever. No one cares. The average salary of orthopedic surgeon is $500,000. Obviously, that's not academics, but in general. And so, so a lot of things that you may go through in life, people probably won't care. And so you really have to keep that in mind, particularly hospital administrators. Healthcare providers are historically bad patients. We're terrible. Dr. Carson did my ACL on a Thursday or Wednesday. I was on a cane at work on a Monday. I was sitting in a stool doing surgery on the next Thursday. Just stupid, you know, but, you know, that's kind of what we do, right? We say we don't have any time. We self-diagnose, we self-medicate. And sometimes we self-medicate with things that we probably shouldn't. And we return to work too quickly. And that's whether it's you're injured, whether it's on your vacation, that's whether you're gone from bereavement. So many different scenarios where we just go back to work too quickly. And burnout starts in training. So it starts as a resident, it actually starts as a medical student sometimes. You know, for people of color, it starts way sooner than that. But we see it kind of manifest more in medical training. Mental health is an issue. And it really is. If you look at the struggling residents, about 30 to 40% of them have a documented or undocumented mental illness. And so it's there, and there's reasons why people aren't doing well. And a lot of it's underlying. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And things don't magically get better after training. You think, oh, I'm gonna be a faculty member, I'm gonna be an attending, I'm gonna start making money, life's gonna get better. No, I mean, it's just different. Underlying issues just become magnified. You know, it's just, there's things you go through in residency you won't go through as a faculty member. Like I had zero money as a fourth year resident. Car broke down, my house I was in trouble. I will never go through that again. But there were some things that I never thought I would ever experience as a faculty member, which I have. So it's just different. Residency takes a lot out of you mentally. I mean, obviously we know the physical part, even with duty hour changes, it's still rough on you. But it's a lot mentally. You know, all these numbers out here are things that, you know, you never really paid attention for it until you had a resident who was depressed, or you had someone, a medical student who showed up who was on medication or things, and you started looking into it. And it's a lot. I mean, clinical depression isn't that much. More than 2 weeks of low mood. I mean, that's every winter for some people. You know, low energy, low self-esteem. These are things that are pretty common that we just don't see. Anxiety is huge. I see that a lot in residents who are struggling, is that they have high anxiety. You know, there's this proponent of people that say residents of color have imposter syndrome and things like that, and it creates this anxiety. I believe to some extent that is related to the environment that they're in more than them as an individual, but it's still there. But the fear and uneasiness, I mean, that's there now. I mean, when my first couple of years in practice, I had fear and uneasiness every Wednesday night because I had surgery on Thursday. Sleep problems, you know, people have those obviously, and have children, it's even worse. Self-doubt and stage fright. And I have a resident right now who does very well when he is somewhere else. But when he is on site with us and he's with certain faculty members, he completely freezes. And it's really hard to kind of manage that. And how do you help somebody in that scenario? It's really challenging. There's anger associated with residency. You know, there's a lot of people who are less educated than you who tell you a lot of things to do. And, you know, periodically you get pissed off with that. Eric will tell you, I mean, my biggest issue is that I'm a pretty decent sized Black guy. And so I really can't get angry, because even if I'm justified, it's a problem. And so, so you have to find ways to manage your anger. Loneliness is there too. You know, I spent several Christmases without my family as a resident, so I get that. And then suicide is a thing, and it is it's higher in people in healthcare. It's higher in women in healthcare. It's higher in underrepresented minority women in healthcare because the stressors are higher in them. It's not, a lot of times it's linked to mental illness and to substance abuse. We see a lot of substance abuse. It's not just the anesthesiologists that are stealing meds out of the drawers. It's a lot of different people. You know, even some of our partners have had time away due to substance abuse, so we've experienced that. Surveys are surveys, but you start looking at them, and it's a lot of people who felt like they had something, but they couldn't get treated. They felt like either their boss would feel a certain kind of way about it, or their professional societies would look at them some kind of way, or maybe they wouldn't get a job if it was found out that they had been evaluated for some scenario. And so sometimes even getting your medical license, if there's any history of any of this type of stuff, it holds your license up. So a lot of times people are really scared to kind of get help. And that just kind of just keeps you spiraling down this pathway. So and we'll talk about a lot of potential solutions later. These are the scary slides. So unforeseen stresses. COVID was an unforeseen stress for the world. Uncertainty of it was a challenge. I tell everybody it's like being in the airport and they say your flight's delayed for an hour, and then 30 minutes later your flight's delayed for another hour, and then 30 minutes later your flight's delayed till 1 o'clock, and then 30 minutes later it's delayed till tomorrow. And so that's literally what COVID has been like. It was going to be over in June. It's going to be over here. It's going to be over. It's still going. So it just hangs on you and you just can't get rid of it. And so we were at higher risk. Healthcare providers are at higher risk or susceptible group. Underrepresented minorities tend to be a susceptible group in that, even people who have money. Family concerns. Obviously you're scared. My folks are from Alabama. Folks down there don't want to act right. You know how that is. So it's concerning. Disappointment, from political, societal, personal. One of my best friends, couldn't come to my kid's birthday party. It's just how it is. So those types of things come into play. And so you look at kind of what's happened and how, rates have gone up and people have died and people who are trying to do the right thing have died, and it sucks, and it creates depression and anxiety in people. So how do you get well? That's $1 million question, literally. Like, everyone has an opinion. Your social media feed, everybody on there is some sort of expert. My wife's a dietitian. She did an internship, went to school, did all this other stuff. And if I go online right now, I can find 500 people who have done nothing but an online course who feel like they're way more educated and telling me how to eat. The same thing goes with everything else. So exercise more, do this, do that, and you'll figure it out. And sometimes your family does too. The story, the interest for me is that when I was 18, I found I was diabetic. I lost a bunch of weight. I go home to see my grandmother, and she's like, "Sean, you done lost all this weight. You just need to drink more orange juice and eat." Obviously, that made it worse. So family has their own opinions on how they can treat you, and a lot of times they think it's helpful, and sometimes it's not. Every organization wants a champion of wellness of some sort. Is it another box to check, kind of like a diversity lead? Sometimes it is. And you never get the same answer from each person or for each person. So there's a lot to that. So, like you said, you go online, do more yoga, drink more fruit, eat this, make this. This will make you better. Obviously, if you lived on the beach somewhere and you could do yoga and do a handstand, maybe you're doing better than most of us. Meditate, sit there and find yourself. Again, kind of hard to do, in the wintertime in the Northeast. So, these things are challenging. And then mindfulness, big buzzword, mindfulness. And so a lot of discussion on that. What does that mean? And, how do you kind of relate to kind of yourself and internally and kind of find ways to make yourself happy? And there's a lot with that that can be helpful, but it can be a huge box. So I'm no expert, right? I mean, my suggestions are based on anecdote, personal experience, my time as a program director, some coursework, some research, So there's a lot of stuff that out there. I'm just kind of giving you my little tidbits. So remember what got you to this point. So I tell every resident who might be struggling to remember that before you got here, you were the shit. You were somebody. And so don't think just because you got here, you're not that anymore. So your environment may dictate to a point where you doubt yourself, but you shouldn't, right? And so a lot of that goes into that. Remember what got you to this point and kind of keep that in mind the whole time. Remember what your motivations were to get you to this point. Keep those things in mind your whole time. And remember what motivations you have going forward. So if you have a family, obviously that's a motivation, right? If children, motivation. If you just have goals in life, you kind of keep those goals in mind. Revisit the things you enjoy. It's real easy to get away from that. Especially with COVID, you couldn't see anybody, you couldn't go to the gym. A lot of stuff that you like to do, you just can't do. I played a lot of sports before I tore my knee up. But it's when you can't play those things, you can't do those things. It's tough, And I have a 3-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. And so my former Saturdays of watching college football all day and watching NFL all day on Sunday are pretty much gone. It's like Cocomelon and whatever else you're gonna watch on TV. It's like, you know, puppy dog pals and stuff is all I get nowadays. So I get up with the baby at 4 a.m. to watch Sports Center. Basically, that's kind of what I do. Lean on others. So that's important. It's not just people who are above you, not just your mentors, but your co-residents. You know, sometimes lean on people who you don't suspect will be helpful for you. Sometimes there's a nurse or a staff member or somebody there who like really would help you if you ask them. And don't be too proud to ask. Value your significant other or others. I say others because there's some single people probably online and you may not have one. But value them for sure. You know, I'm on this call tonight, and you know, when I get off the call, I should probably acknowledge the fact that my significant other was watching the children while I was doing this. But you know, when you go to work, you feel like, oh, I go to work, I did all this stuff for the family. You get home, you realize that the family's still there, and so you gotta really value those people and really take the time to kind of do that because they're helping you get through this process. So if you're in residency right now and you have a family, your family is really accommodating the fact that you are not around a lot. And so like you really have to pay attention to that and remember that. Because if you don't, they won't be around later. Okay. Ask for help, like I said. And if you don't get it from somebody, ask somebody else. One person isn't always the answer. There's a bunch of people out there who are willing to help you if you ask them. And they don't always have to look like you either. There's definitely a lot of people out there who I've asked for help who I didn't even expect it, but I needed it. And they came through. So remember that. Outsource when you can. And this is something my dad told me a long time. I used to clean my whole house every Saturday morning because that's what I did growing up. My mom made me clean my bathroom, my bedroom every day. And he said, why are you doing that? And I was like, well, because that's what we do, right? And he was like, no. How long does it take you to do that? I told him how long it took me. He said, how much are you worth an hour? I told him what I thought I was worth an hour. He said, well, how much does it cost you to pay somebody else to do it? So well, less than that. He said, well, you should pay somebody else to do it every time. What I mean by that is that value your time. Your time is really important. And like, you know, especially don't climb on the roof and dig in gutters and stuff because you fall and hurt yourself and you're not working. So keep all those things in mind. It's really good to be resourceful, but you don't have a ton of time every day. And so really value the time that you have. And if you can outsource stuff, do so. And that's, people might differ on that, but I think that's a reasonable thing that I've learned. Every institution and workplace has resources. So, you know, we have like it's called FEEP here, and there's a bunch of kind of confidential scenarios where that you can kind of go and talk to somebody. When we have residents who are in trouble, we actually send them through a process where they actually get evaluated for, you know, mental illness and some other things as well. And all that stuff is confidential. We have no access. No one has any access to those records. So, so there's a lot of resources out there to help you. And I think programs and departments and institutions have increased those resources in the past several years because of kind of the way the world has changed. You know, consider professional coaching. So if you're getting into early practice, you know, there's something to somebody else looking at your life and saying, this is how you could probably do this better. And they don't have to be somebody who is in your field, for example. Like I have a coach, and a lot of people in executive levels have coaches, and they're people that really kind of just help you to kind of make the decisions that you want to make. Sometimes you get in your own way. And so sometimes you need somebody else who can look at you and be like, this is what you want to do. This is what you need to do, you know? And so consider that. There are apps out there. I use Headspace. There was a point where healthcare providers can get it all for free. Calm is another one. So sometimes you just need to, and I think I said it wrong, but they get all these things where you can kind of look at them and just take a few seconds during the day, your Apple Watch, if you want to breathe for a little bit, like all that stuff kind of makes a difference. Engage your mentors and allies. And so we talked about that in detail before, but it's really important to kind of continue to reach out, continue to keep contact and maintain those relationships, because it's not just when you need something that you need to talk to them, because sometimes you just need to talk. And sometimes, you know, you may have a case that you want to talk about, and in the next 10 minutes, you may just want to talk about something else. And like, and it's good to kind of have those relationships. Take care of your health. Really important to take care of your health. Go to the dentist. Like, I mean, it's I think I went to the dentist twice when I was a resident. It's ridiculous. Like, teeth are a big deal. I live in an area where a lot of people don't have teeth. A lot of people who are my age, when they go to surgery and all of a sudden they have no teeth in their mouth. So look, go to the dentist. Having a toothache is terrible. It really affects your overall health. We've seen that historically in people where health declines significantly if their teeth are bad. And limit your vices. And so, you know, whether it's you want to have a little bit of cognac on the weekend, or you want to do this, or you live in a state where it's legal and you want to have some marijuana, whatever it is, limit your vices. Remember, the risk benefit situation is different here. You make a mistake at this point, it's a lot harder to come back from it than it is when you're younger. And so, so those things I think are important. I mean, there's nothing to say you can't do stuff, but just be careful. Go to the doctor once a year, kind of make sure your stuff is straight. Some things you just won't find out unless you get checked. And so keep those things in mind, because then they'll come back to you later.
And just to ask a quick question about taking care of your health, and it may be the simplest answer, but I feel like people need to hear it. As a resident, when we're busy and, you know, we feel bad for taking time off for service, you know, what advice do you give to those residents for making sure they schedule those appointments to get to see the dentist or doctor's appointment?
So, you know, your presumption is that your faculty member will be upset, right? Your presumption is that they will feel like you're not willing to show up to work. And obviously, you can try and do these things around your vacation if you want, but you also can just be upfront and say, hey, you know, in 2 weeks at 3 o'clock, I have a doctor's appointment. Is it okay if I go? I maybe only know one faculty member who was a complete dick anyways, who would have like said no. Okay. So like, in general, like people are very comfortable with that. I mean, we see the same thing when you have children, right? If your kid has a doctor's appointment, like, you know, those are hard to predict, but you know, at the same time, if you ask ahead of time, it should be reasonable. You know, I mean, you know, if you're not on call in particular, I think those are reasonable times to do that. And again, you know, unless you're someone who has chronic illness or something, it's not like you're going, you know, every month. So, you know, I think that's
Richard, one comment that if you can comment as a program director. One of the difficulties that I've had is I've had residents have had, whether it's marital issues, personal issues, wherever it is, you as a program director suggest that, you know, these are issues that you need to address. You need to take care of yourself. And as you said, most attendings are very accepting. The problem is keeping the confidentiality with the residents, because the residents are seeing you disappear during times. And I've actually had a resident who just talked to me this past Friday. She's getting harassed by her chief resident because she's got to disappear for a specific appointment for her. And I don't know quite how to deal with that situation. Do you have you or Doretti have any suggestions?
Well, I think the one challenge is how much do you want to disclose, right? I mean, if you want it to be confidential, then there obviously will be issues with that, but you have to engage your program director. If you have scenarios where you're going to miss time because of things like that, you have to engage the program director. You have to let them fight that battle for you in that scenario, because you can't really fight it for yourself. And so, so you can't do it if you don't tell somebody. You have to tell somebody who has some sort of influence. And, you know, I wouldn't tell everybody. I mean, that's the number one thing. The other thing is don't expect people to keep your business to themselves, because, you know, you may tell somebody in confidence, and then they tell somebody in confidence, and they tell somebody in confidence. And so, so, you know, I think if it's something that you really want to be confidential, then you really need to limit that circle early on, and kind of manage it from there. But that's a PD situation right there. I think, you know, if someone is missing time and it's been said that they can do that, then that needs to be kind of shared with the PD, you know, and then from there.
One additional little point that I wanted to add is what I've been trying to do lately too, and I think, you know, you don't have to be the PD to do this, but is to like normalize struggle, normalize the challenge, and also normalize taking care of ourselves. So when people are, you know, and sometimes I have to encourage the residents to do that. I say, hey, listen, like, you know, we had a resident who took paternity leave. And I said, hey, you know, like, I'm not going to share with other people, hey, you took paternity leave, that's your personal business. I'll say that you're leading by example by doing this. I want you, you know, I would love it if you would share with your co-residents the decision that you've made to do this. And so sort of pointing out, I asked my chief residents to sort of lead by example. If we're going to change the culture, So that to be one where, you know, to your point, Michelle, like where we're actually taking care of ourselves, we need to not sort of sneak out of the office and hope that no one notices that we're gone. We need to walk out saying, I'm going to the dentist, you know, and that's, all of us can do that no matter what stage of career you're in.
And I'll also say that those things are better taken when you are working hard on the service. So if you're busting it on the service and you're really kind of doing all the work you're supposed to do, people are a whole lot more comfortable with letting you kind of get out. You know, if you kind of half-ass in the service, then it's hard to ask for those things. So, you know, keep those things in mind as well. Like your performance up to that point helps kind of dictate how people interpret your time away. And so be a hard worker, kind of being a hard worker helps you in those, bridge those gaps too. And then the last part is that, you know, life isn't finding shelter from the storm, it's learning to dance in the rain. And I think that's an important thing to think of, is that no one's going to protect you. There's nothing you can do to protect yourself from issues. They're going to come. You just got to figure out how to manage them, and learning how to manage them either by yourself, with help, with allies, with mentors, with family. All those things are important, and how you figure out how to thrive in those environments. And the reality is that everyone has been able to do that you've seen on this call. That everyone here on this call that's a faculty member or someone who's senior has gone through some storms, and they figured out a way to kind of get through it. And now, you know, everyone's dancing. So, so I think those things are important. I'm going to go ahead and give the talk back now.
Dr. Dacus, thank you so much. That was awesome. Appreciate that a lot. We have a few questions. I'm just going to save it for just one real quick. So this is actually one personally. So, you know, I know a lot of residents in orthopedics and different specialties who've had personal conflicts, which have led to a lot of personal stress. Some residents have even started antihypertensive in residency due to these personal conflicts. The second thing I think is that, particularly as a second year in orthopedics, sleep deprivation is a real issue. How do you suggest that residents navigate these interpersonal conflicts between attendings and residents that cause significant stress? And how do you recommend that residents navigate the significant sleep deprivation that comes during orthopedic surgery residency?
Oh, wow. Well, let me get the sleep one first, because I think that one's a little bit easier. I think there, you know, it's still a lot. I mean, you're not working 120 anymore, but it's still a lot, right? And so, you know, there's people that still fall asleep at the streetlight. So, you know, there's a part of it where it is recognizing your fatigue. You know, you have things you want to do when you get out of work, or, you know, you really should rest, but you don't. You have to take advantage of those opportunities to get rest when you can. And you don't always have to move fast, right? I mean, like, I use the Jim Brown analogy a lot of times, is that like people, you know, say, why are you kind of walking slow? And it's like, I'm not slow because I'm hurt, I'm saving energy. And there's something to that. It's like, you don't always have to expend all of your energy all the time. Find a way to kind of manage your energy to support yourself, you know, find opportunities to get rest when you can, but not just physical rest, but mental rest too. You're most of the times you wake up in the middle of the night, you can kind of push through the next morning, just because if you're busy, you can do that. But, you know, just remember that you need to find your spots, you know, pick your spots. And when you're on vacation, like, relax. You know, everyone wants to go and like do all kinds of stuff on vacation. And sometimes you just need to just stay at home and chill. Like, I mean, you know, a staycation isn't bad sometimes. Not every time, but like sometimes you just need to kind of get yourself back, you know? So I think that's reasonable for there. There's no way to get around working, but there is a way to kind of manage your sleep. As far as like conflicts and how you manage conflicts in residency, it's also $1 million question. And there are challenges when you start to have conflicts early. So as a junior resident, when you start to have conflicts, it creates a problem, because if those conflicts aren't resolved, it follows you, and it follows you through the rest of your time period. And people who've never even worked with you will have the presumption that you're a certain kind of way because of what's been said, right? Yeah. So your performance early on really dictates kind of how you're perceived later. So the quickest way you can mitigate those conflicts, the quicker you mitigate those conflicts early, the better, right? So number one is find out what people want, because sometimes you just don't know. So your senior resident, is on you about everything, telling you this, that, and the other. You think you're doing everything right. Find out what they want. If you give them what they want and they still complaining, they're just being contrarian on purpose, So like, find out what they want. Same thing with faculty. A lot of faculty do a poor job of articulating what they expect from you. A lot of faculty will try and lead by example and be like, I'm just going to work hard and see a bunch of patients, and the residents should be working hard and seeing a bunch of patients too. And you may not perceive it as that because you're just trying to figure out what the one patient's, declare range is like, right? And so really kind of sit down early and kind of get an idea of what the expectation is for you. And that will help you a lot of times in these scenarios as far as what people can expect from you, and then if you produce, then it's hard for people to kind of be bad on it. The other is kind of get some support from peers. Sometimes you just don't. Some people just rub you the wrong way, or you rub somebody the wrong way. It just happens, right? And so understanding that like maybe this person's just like that, and they do that with everybody, kind of makes you kind of feel a little bit better about your situation. There's always one faculty member who's just kind of hard on everybody. And so kind of knowing that up front kind of helps you to not feel like self-doubt about it, to kind of understand that like, all right, I just got to get through this rotation. I'm gonna try and do everything I can to get through this rotation. Get as much intel as you can from people who've already done the rotation on how to be successful. I think that's helpful for you as well. And stuff like that I think is good. And then if it becomes something that's beyond that, and you have to engage somebody else, I mean, there's a time where you have to use your mentors, use your allies, and sometimes use the program director to kind of intercede sometimes. You don't want it to get that far, but if it gets to a point where you're out there by yourself, you got to find somebody to help.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Dacus. Appreciate that a lot.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that discussion. We'll move on to our next topic now, which will be research and research involvement as a resident. This will be presented by Dr. Kojo Owutu-Wachau. He completed undergrad, medical school, as well as residency at Duke University, followed by a sports medicine and shoulder surgery fellowship at the Hospital for Special Surgery. So I'll turn it over to you now, Kojo.
All right, Justin, I appreciate you. Y'all can hear me okay?
Yep, sounds great.
Okay, cool. I got a new microphone situation. So so as you might have seen, I'm at Ortho Virginia, which is private practice. I've been there about 1 year and 3 months and loving life. But talking about research. So the thing I'll start off with is everybody who's at this point had to do research to get here. You might have done some research, you understand, in undergrad. You definitely had to do research in medical school to get into orthopedics. That's the mind frame that I think you need to take as you move into residency, as you go throughout residency. Even if you're dead set on going into private practice, you're not doing academics. Everybody needs to be doing research as a resident to some capacity to find those opportunities. And really what it comes down to is opening up doors for you, okay? So, I mean, at this time and, place, people talk a lot about receipts on Instagram, Facebook. You got to have your receipts. So as a minority in particular, you never want to be in a position where you're relying on the goodwill of others, the majority in particular, to show your excellence. And research is one of those receipts. Literally, you can lay down a sheet of paper, your CV, boom, that's what I got. That's what I can produce. You always want to have that objective measure that no one can really take away from you, because they'll try to take the subjective away from you. And having that research, you can never, completely counteract all those forces that go against us, right? But at the very least, you could have something in your playbook to allow you to kind of hurl over the biases of people who may not even know you and never met you. The next thing I'll tell you is, and Dr. Leeper brought this up, when you're applying for jobs, even if it is a private practice job, right, they're going to look at your research because they're looking to attract patients, and patients are becoming savvy. All right, patients are looking at, oh, so you're a sports doctor. Are you involved with AOSSM? You presented at such and such. You're on this board, you're on that board. Patients like seeing that. So even if you're in private practice, that research that you did in residency, if you have that on your CV, if it's online somewhere, that's a big, big bonus to you. So it never really stops. People are always looking to see receipts on you. And then back to the discussions of mentorship, research is a pathway to that too. So if you're doing research with an individual, with a physician, with an attending, you're automatically showing them, through that relationship, what you're capable of, assuming things go well, right? And that person will know you better than most people. So when it comes to letters of recommendation, when it comes to, opening up networks for you, that person can really be an advocate for you. So from every standpoint, research, it's just very helpful to you. So everybody should be doing more than the minimum requirement, required to graduate residency as it pertains to research. Now, I think the question then becomes, how do I make that happen? Because residency is already incredibly busy. So, I can tell you what worked for me, and I can tell you what I've seen work for others. What I'll say is identifying your interests early, like early, as in like the first year, and not waiting, is a great way to start. So you may not know what specialty you're going into. Going to sports, fitness, you may not know, right? But if you've already got an inkling, or if you vibe with certain individuals, ask them on rotation. Are you doing some research? Is there something small I could hop in on? It may start small. It might be a little review article that you just type a little discussion portion for, maybe. And then from there, they see you can produce and you do something more, right? But every single little thing is adding up for you every time you do it. So reach out early on, I would say. If it's intern year and you're, say, on an off rotation, maybe that's a chance to be doing some literature review on things that interest you, or learning more about what your attendings are working on. The more you work on that, you keep increasing your value to the people around you. And value, you can't pay for that. Money won't buy that. So I'll open that for questions for right now. That's my first little spiel.
Thanks so much for that. Do you think, in terms of applying for fellowship, is there any specific type of research project that's more valuable in terms of fellowship application?
Oh man, that's a great question. So the way it was given to me, and I didn't really achieve this myself, I wouldn't say, but you want to have a couple kind of heavy hitting research topics, right? That might mean basic science for you. That might mean a really impactful, clinical research project you're involved with, or something that really will open people's eyes up to you, right? And so you want to have that because that opens up discussions when you're talking in your interviews, and then it makes you just look impressive. But then on top of that, ideally, you want to have a whole bunch of little smaller things to pad your stats, so to speak, right? As they would say in the game. That way, no one can look at your application and be like, oh, well, that's not enough research. So for me, I can tell you, I was much more in the first category. I had a lot of very strong basic science, papers. And so, it was 2 or 3 really strong ones, right? And so the people who, took the time to break it down and really look at it, be like, oh, wow, this is really impressive. You did this as a resident. But it'd be 1 or 2 people who would be like, well, you didn't really do any research. We see people come through here with 20 papers, not knowing that those 20 papers compared to what I had done have been, there's difference, there's levels to this thing. So if you can be in a situation where you kind of have both, where you have that impressive couple, really strong projects, but then also have, 5, 6, 7 small little case reviews, this and that, systematic reviews, meta-analysis, if you're into that you can add to pad your stats, it'll be helpful to you.
Hey,
Awesome.
I just wanted to add one thing. Okay, it's what you just heard is really important. I want everybody to understand. You got to complete something. That's really part of the deal here. Having an abstract or something you presented or submitted is not nearly as powerful as you've completed some research project with a mentor. And people are looking for that when they see that. It's got to be completed. And there is a whole system by which journals are evaluated as far as their impact. If you can target those journals, as you just heard, that's going to be important. But you got to finish something. The second thing is that there is a direct correlation between the work that you do with a mentor, with research, and your chances of getting into a program. And actually, Dr. Fufa and the crew from HSS just published an article about that, which thankfully references interventions. I just had to throw an interventions reference in there one time. All right, but the goal here is there absolutely is documentation that works. And part of it is the mentorship relationship. Part of it is demonstrating your ability to perform research. Part of it is completing a project with somebody. But when you apply, people want to see that. Last thing, when you present or when you complete a project and it gets published, then that can become kind of part of your academic work. You can present that same topic over and over again. That's how people pad those stats. You can present it at a conference in New York and a conference in California. You can present that bad boy over and over and over again so that your presentation of your high impact article becomes the 20 things that you can put on your research section for your application. These are important things to think about. And I want to make sure that we hear the stress here. Complete it, maintain a relationship with the mentor, and then use that, weaponize those 2 or 3 high impact projects to get yourself academic work that looks good on your resume.
That was awesome, Dr. Ross. Thank you very much for sharing that. Kojo, question for you. In regards to, as a resident, we're all busy clinically. You all are extremely busy clinically. And some residencies have a research block, some don't have a research block. So talk about the life balance of, completing research and starting and initiating research. How do you do that as a resident? Because I know a lot of people are on the line trying to figure out, we know it's on our free time, but talk a little bit about that.
Oh, absolutely. That's probably the hardest part, I would say. I think you have to be strategic, and there's no way to sugarcoat it. It's going to take some of your free time. It's going to eat into your spare time. But being strategic means thinking about your work schedule and when you could fit it in. So for me, as interns, we had a radiology rotation, right? So that's shorter hours, and that was the time to go out, meet with mentors, and get started that way. As you move on, there are some rotations that are going to be, not quite as strenuous in terms of late night hours. Sometimes that means more of the outpatient services. That might mean sports medicine in some cases, depending. Those are opportunities when you need to be kind of planning ahead. Well, I know this rotation is coming up, not to short your work on that rotation, but just knowing I have a rotation where I may have some more free evenings, right? Where I'm not necessarily on call all the time or what have you, where I can get some of that work done. And then, frankly, the part of it is just going to be kind of having to sacrifice a little bit. And that really just what it comes down to. So for me, some of my research, I was having to go down to the radiology, section, hang with the radiologist and review MRIs for this, MRI study. And it had to be after rotation time. So that's 6, 7 p.m., after a full day of clinic. Now, speaking back to Dr. Dacus's, talk about balance, you got to balance that with the rest of your life. But there may be some days we have to take that L, frankly, to get started.
I just want to add one thing to that, about being strategic. But the one thing about being strategic is really kind of like, if you're into sports or whatever, doing a scouting report, know which faculty members are productive, which faculty members are getting the research into the journals that you want to get in, and in particular to your specialty that you want to apply to too. So, we have one faculty member, we're like, he's publishing all the time, and he's a spine faculty member. So everybody that's going to spine is like, I'm gonna work with him, because we know regardless, there's gonna get something into a journal, and it's probably gonna be a pretty good journal. So I think you really have to figure that out. The ways to figure those things out are to talk to the residents that are going to the specialty, that have applied, that have gotten the fellowships you want to get into, and really try to do your research even on the faculty members early, as well as all the other things that Kojo said.
And I just say, Kojo, you preface your statement by saying a little bit. It's not a little bit, it's a lot of it. It's a huge sacrifice of balancing the two. And to be productive research-wise and to be a good resident, it takes a lot of strategic effort, but it takes a lot of time. As you said, it could be your weekends, it could be late nights. A lot of us have kids during residency. It is strategically, you have to be strategic about it, but it is not a little bit, Kojo, it's a lot of it. You know that.
Keep it real. So one cheat code. So this isn't research per se, but it helps to pad your stats. So a lot of journals are looking for reviewers, okay? And they will accept residents as reviewers. In the sports world, that's AJSM, that's arthroscopy. And so you can apply to be a reviewer wherein you're going to end up, reviewing maybe 1 or 2 articles a year to start, right? And that's something you can put on your CV. That's academic activity. I'm a reviewer. And some of these journals will even bump you up to editorial board status early on if you do a good job with the reviews. And that's a huge receipt you can put on your CV. So, kind of diversifying your plan to include other academic pursuits is part of the whole game.
Awesome points, Coach. I appreciate that. I have a couple questions, actually. So the first thing is, I have a decent number of medical students, and I was kind of like this myself when I was a medical student. What advice do you have to medical students or residents who may be at academic institutions where research faculty is not as productive? How do these people get their name out there, get on papers, and become as productive as possible. And there's a second question is just, so if you are green when it comes to research, I've noticed that people typically like to do research with other people who have done research before. How do you advise people in those two situations? If you're not in an environment where there's a lot of productivity, and if you're inexperienced, how do you kind of get the ball rolling?
Those are two great and frankly tough questions. So to answer your first question, so if you're in a situation where not a lot of research is happening, well, for one thing, you're going to have to get with whoever is doing something. If there is nothing going on, truly, you might have to think about other avenues. Okay, so that's where your network really comes into play. Okay, so some research strategies, as you know, like systematic reviews and what have you, are not location dependent. You can do a systematic review from anywhere, right? So using your network and reaching out to some of the people you see right here on this very organization, right? Reaching out and saying, hey, is there anything I could jump on and get involved with? And then that solves your second problem too, right? So if you say you're doing a systematic review with Dr. Carson, who's at WashU, right? And you go to another attending, later on and say, well, look, I have the systematic review, boom. Because like you said, there's haves and have-nots when it comes to research, but suddenly you're a have. So if you're in a situation like that, which a lot of people are in, then you're going to have to get more creative about how you utilize your network to get started. Another thing to think about is, so review articles, like for instance, the Yellow Journal, what have you, depending on your situation, you may be able to get with an attending who maybe isn't so much research oriented, but maybe help them with a review article for something like that. And that's less time dependent on them because you can do most of the writing perhaps. And then you have their name on there as a cosign.
Awesome advice. So I have given advice to, as somebody, I was at USC for medical school where we didn't do a lot of research, and I went to Rush frequently. Has anyone else, any other attendings or any other residents, have you guys ever explored those types of avenues before, going to adjacent institutions?
Hey, Josh. So I can comment on that a little bit, and kind of also talk about kind of your question about kind of if you're in a place that doesn't have much research involvement. I think if you look at a lot of papers out there, you can see that there's a ton of co-collaboration. There's just people from random institutions that are all on the same paper. I think kind of going into your network, I mean, it doesn't take much for somebody to say, you reach out to somebody and say, hey, can I write an introduction here? Can I write, a discussion here, so to speak, get your name on a paper. I mean, even, some of the stuff I did in residency, like there's people who are like, I went to residency at Columbia, lost away. So I think a lot of people on this call may not like me too much. But I work with people over at USC. I work with people, I got former people I work with who are at like Detroit Henry Ford, and it just kind of works that way. So to speak, there's definitely some politics that go into that, and you have to be careful about that and not kind of get too, you got to know who your leadership is to make sure no one's going to get too angry about that. But it's definitely possible. It's another avenue to kind of, like, Kojo said, pad your stats a little bit, because at the end of the day, like, that's what's going to help you, not some of this other stuff. Sometimes get yourself out of the politics, but, you do what you got to do to get where you need to be.
Appreciate that a lot, Hassani. Okay, honestly, a lot of pearls right here. We're going over a little over time. So if it's all right with everybody, I was actually going to get into our next one, which is navigating the fellowship process. Kojo, appreciate that a lot, okay?
No doubt.
All right, 1 second. Okay, so next we actually have Hassani Swindell. So he is a current, he's from Detroit, Michigan, did his undergrad at Pitt. Then he went to medical school at Columbia University, Physicians and Surgeons, stayed there for residency, and now he is a current orthopedic surgery sports medicine fellow at Rush in Chicago. Just got done with the process, so he's going to kind of help us navigate the fellowship process. Thanks, Hassani.
Hey, thanks, Josh, and thanks for having me. So your first point there, when you start your application. So, when I started residency, one of my really big mentors on day one of intern year basically was like, you did a lot to get here. You were very successful in your own right at getting here. And I know what your CVs look like, but if your CV 2 or 3 years from now looks the same as it does right now, we're gonna have a problem. So that just goes to say that as soon as you kind of walk into residency, that's when you more or less are starting to prepare for your application. Getting involved with research, getting involved and going to different courses. getting involved in different presentations, taking different like necessary leadership roles within your respective residency or respective hospitals or institutions. So because that's going to be, more so building the foundation so that when you do get to the fellowship application interview process, they can look at you and say, hey, not necessarily that, this person has, 100 something publications, but more so, hey, this person knows how to grind, this person knows how to be productive, and this person knows how to, make things work. So it's a constant thing. I think the earlier you start, the easier it's probably going to be necessarily. And then you just kind of keep building on that as you go through the years. As far as when you should pick your letter writers, I would say, most applications, I think it opens like the first week of September or so like that. The conversation should begin probably not too soon after the class before you starts to, matches, so to speak. And I think that's when you kind of get a little bit more committed. You know exactly where you want to go, and you can start planning your schedule for fourth year to like make your rotations with, say if you're going to sports, start off on your sports rotation beginning of fourth year. So you can kind of, get in their ear, become if you weren't before, which hopefully you should have been, become more commonplace face. If you still need to kind of get some research to kind of pad those stats and kind of, put more feathers in your cap, that's the time to do it. And I think a big thing.
Sorry, if you don't mind, let me interrupt you really quickly. So, it's not uncommon, and I don't know if, Justin, I'll be interested to hear if it's different for you or any of the other people who have recently graduated. It wasn't uncommon in the past few years for me to see a senior resident around basically August, September, who didn't have their 3 letter writers. Yeah. Is that something that you saw? And do you think that's a no-no? Because I thought that was quite strange, but I'd say every year there were at least 2 people who are like, I don't know, maybe it's that person, maybe it's that person, So what would you comment on that?
I mean, everybody's situation is different, obviously. And there's extenuating circumstances between, even if people switch fellowship options, closer to that time point that things open up. So I can't speak on the details of it. But I can say, I'm looking back at my residency class, my chief class last year, we did it very early. Just because I think we were informed by a lot of our mentors that this process, the earlier you can get involved, the earlier you kind of decide on what you want in a fellowship and sort of where you want to be, it just gives you a lot more wiggle room, a lot more sort of leeway. The other thing to kind of note is, your letter writers are busy people, as everyone on this panel has talked about kind of before I'm chiming in. So, I think for example, in my residency, there was one person that if you're going in a hand fellowship, you need to give them at least 5 months in advance to write your letter, and they're still going to turn it in probably the day before it's due. It's going to be a great letter nonetheless, but you just know that going in. So, you only do yourself good by starting as early as possible. As far as who you should choose, you want people that aren't just going to write a generic kind of good letter, because on the other end of things, people know who write good letters. They know who write good letters. They know what kind of verbiage they use within their letter to kind of designate, okay, this person's kind of the cream of the crop, or, this person's kind of, just average, so to speak. And I think there's some people who, they may be great people that you work with. You may love them. They may have, great relationships with you. But they may not necessarily be known in a lot of places that you're about to apply to, or, about to hope to interview or hope to kind of matriculate to. So that's a balance you kind of have to play with a little bit.
So let me interrupt you really quickly. And this is a debate in starting a residency, but I think it may be even more relevant in fellowship. I'm not curious. The classic debate, well-known, well-known in the field, but doesn't know me that well, versus the person who's less known in the field, but has known me every day in residency. Where do you go with that? That's a classic debate. Yeah,
that's a very, very difficult subject to navigate. I'll put it like this: because of what I just said about, they know who write good letters, they know what certain people put in their letters. If you have a very, very well-known person and they write just kind of their standard bread and butter letter that, the people who are reviewing the application know that, hey, they didn't say anything glaring, they didn't say the keywords they normally put, I almost feel like that could hurt you. compared to, writing that person that maybe a little less known. It may take somebody, if they say, oh, I might have peripherally heard about that person at like a conference or something, they present their X, Y, and Z, but they write kind of like a stunning, like glowing letter, I'm still new to this game, so to speak, but I almost feel like that's a little bit more impactful for you. I don't know if anybody else on the faculty has.
So, you raise a very interesting question. So I think your last comment was well said. The other part of the comment that's always very interesting, and I'll call Riley Williams out on this one. Riley, or even some of the guys at Rush, if you're in an institution like you're here at WashU, and you essentially go to one of these institutions, and you don't have a letter from me, you become a suspect.
That is true.
I mean, literally in the middle of interviews, Riley has called me and is like, "Hey, there's a dude here. Do you know who he is? You don't have a letter from him." And that's and that's just keeping it real, because there are strong relationships within fellowships between persons, and they have specific questions. So I would just say that part of it too is, you got to be really strategic who's writing your letters. And I can just tell you, I've been at this game a long time, that I can tell you that that's one of the more important things.
Let me follow up on that question, if you don't mind. So, frequently when you start this process, people have an idea of who they want, where a couple places that they might want to go. At a larger institution, do you all identify people with connections to places that you might want to go early? Is that something that you would recommend, Hassan, or anybody else on the call?
I would say absolutely. I mean, that is totally critical. As Josh and Justin are going through the process now, and that you're already through this process, I mean, the realization is there are some pipelines. For instance, Stedman Hawkins in sports has a typical pipeline of a couple of programs. HSS, in essence, has a couple of pipelines of people that come there. And you have to understand, those pipelines are usually pretty consistent year after year. So if you look at HSS, there's, whatever it is, it varies from year to year, number of sports fellowship. If there's 8, I can tell you there's typically about 4 given away. So yes, those connections will help, because your odds will go up significantly.
Yeah. I think it comes to those are known entities, so to speak. So, same way it goes, a certain residency takes somebody from a certain program, and that person does well, then, in that fellowship's mind, they're like, okay, cool. Like we can take a chance on somebody from that place, in the near future. It goes the other way, somebody from a residency program, they go to a fellowship and they bomb it. That fellowship may not take somebody from that institution ever again. So there's a lot of things that are sort of out of your control, but you just sort of play to the strengths of your program and kind of what out there from more so talking to people that have kind of gone through it before, and they can identify what are these pipelines, what are, what's not a good move, what is.
And you're a classic example. I mean, Rush for sports fellowship, if you are not published, there's no point in applying. It is a program where, and again, it's knowing the programs of where you're applying to. I mean, I'm picking on all the sports programs because that's what I know best. But, if you're interested in going to Rush for fellowship and you've written one paper, there's no point in you applying. There's no point in calling me and saying, can you make a call to Brian Cole and ask him to get me in the fellowship? It's just not going to happen. So there are certain expectations, and that's part of doing your homework about the fellowships, to know what is needed, who has connections. There's a lot of homework involved in this. Who should write your letters? The information's out there. You just have to ask.
That's a great point, Dr. Carson. I think it leads to actually the next point, which is, what makes you a strong applicant? And is it your OITE scores? Is it your evaluation? What goes on your fellowship application that's visible to the application, to the programs?
Yeah, so you may not like the answer that I'm going to give you. I can't say OITE scores matter, but when I was going through the process and I talked to a lot of people from different institutions, including my own program directors, just people I've kind of met over the years. One, sort of where you came from is a big one, because again, it just gives you a little bit of credibility from the back end that they don't have to think too hard about. But I also had one mentor who said, basically, they look at the size of your CV. And that's a little discouraging, because you're like, man, there might be so much more to me. But look, that's kind of the reality of the situation, so to speak. And the only way to really kind of pad your CV in a residency standpoint is literature. I mean, it's, doing your research, doing your presentations, doing the courses that just kind of add lines to that CV, pads your stats, so to speak. And that just gets you into the door. Once you're in the door and you're in an interview, sure, then you can talk about kind of all the other things and, what are your goals, what are your aspirations, what are your sort of 5-year, your 10-year plan, and, the fellowship, and you can decide, whether that's a good fit. But I think if you don't have that, you're kind of putting yourself at many, many, many tiers behind a lot of the people coming out of you at that exact same year. I can speak from, the year I applied for sports. I mean, the average number of publications at, a lot of the programs that are, like Rush, Pitt, Vail, stuff like that, the average number of publications was like 18. So, if you weren't even in that window, you kind of weren't even in the room, so to speak. And that varies depending on, what type of programs you want to get to. But for, a lot of the top players, that's what they're looking for.
I'll just add one little caveat to that, I won't get into the details. There are people that do look at OITE scores. There are people that do look at USMLE scores. So it's good to know which programs and which personnel that does involve. It is few and far between, but there are some programs I know specifically where I've been called and said, this person, really hasn't done all that well. And I'm like, well, believe me, they're a superstar. I'm not going back at that point in time and looking at the USMLE scores. They've completed the residency. I've written a letter. I've seen them as a resident. I don't put any credence on that, but I can tell you certain people do.
Great points, Dr. Carson and Sonny. One thing that did surprise me was to find out that residency evaluations, which is something that we take kind of seriously, basically, though, we view them as our grades, those are not on fellowship applications. And when mentoring medical students, one of the things that I have frequently said is that if you do take a research year during medical school, a lot of those, the fruit from that labor frequently does pay off during fellowship as well. Have you all found that to be true?
You're saying that, you take a research year, like in what sense are you talking? Or I just want to make sure I understand your question.
Oh, well, just saying that it kind of surprised me how much research matters for the fellowship application process. And I was saying that frequently, a lot of residents, most of their CV is composed of research that they did during the research year during medical school. Have you all seen that to be true as well?
I would agree. Yeah. I mean, it's particularly if it's quality research, it is definitely looked upon very highly. It is. It's not padding it. I mean, it is that you did it during that time, but it's showing your commitment towards research. And I think there's a lot of understanding that during your residency, it's hard to do. So, for instance, at Rush, there were 2 of my residents who went on to do the fellowship at Rush from UVA. But, I can tell you, I mean, one of them, Jordan, had like 16 podium presentations, like his PGY5 year at the Academy. And Ian had 13, and each one of them finished. I mean, and they're the unusual ones of doing that much research during residency. But it was impressive enough that, both you all know, they're legendary at Rush. Of the amount of publications they did. Yeah. So, it behooves you, whatever research you do, it's quality research. We are looking at that, and we are looking at, reviewing a lot of applications. I'm just looking at number of publications that have been peer reviewed. I'm not going to look at what year was published. I'm looking at your peer reviewed articles that are out there. I'm not going to look at the year.
Yeah, I think the only thing, just because I could just see where this is going as far as, the numbers are just getting higher and higher. There has to be a trend as well. If you have a bunch of publications and they're like, okay, they were, 4 years ago, clearly, and you've done nothing since the time you walked into residency, like that's an automatic kind of red flag, and I have friends who are in fellowship now who that's kind of what they did. They took a research year off of med school and didn't really, they did some stuff, but didn't really do much, so to speak, in residency. And it did hurt them. They were kind of disappointed when they didn't get certain interviews that they, probably should have deserved, but that's just not how the game works, so to speak.
Totally agree.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Excellent point. And then, just as time kind of gets, when and how do you decide on that top choice? How do you kind of navigate that process of when you figure out where you really want to go?
Yeah, I put more emphasis in the how. And, everyone has kind of spoken today on this panel has mentioned a fair amount about networking. And that means, honestly, so much. The more information you can get before you even send in your application is so helpful. I mean, Kojo's on this call and he knows that, how many times I texted him kind of before this whole process started just to get little, intel about different programs and, what was the vibe of things, where people go after it. It's not, I mean, there's no rules against contacting the current fellows just to get that information, contacting your buddies that they've heard rumors. Some of the rumors are definitely not true, but if you start hearing the same thing over and over again, it's pretty accurate. And I think the approach that you should take is try to, with all the things you hear about these different places and these things that you may feel are ideal, try to place yourself in that position and say like, okay, can I make this work? Where people go after these fellowships, is that something that I would like to do? Are you the type of person to say, in my career, I want to be on the podium, or I want to be in this teaching setting, or, from a sports perspective, are you the person that like wants to be, the team physician on the sidelines every day? Like there's certain programs that just don't fit those. So I think if you kind of develop whatever is your 5-year, your 10-year plan, and not to give like an inside secret, that's one question that actually came up quite a bit on the fellowship interview trail. I think it allows you sort of better perspective to kind of figure out what things you are looking for in an exact fellowship location, fellowship institution. So I think that's the how. Doing your homework, nothing you've done, nothing atypical from what you've been doing for the past 5 years or so, and just overall preparation. As far as the win, I think there's a lot of opinions on that. I think the earlier, the better. The earlier, certain programs are very clear that, look, after the interview day, the list is closed. Like there is no kind of post-interview movement of, whatever their list is, whether that be true or not. The earlier you can, make a decision, sort of have your mentors reach out, to kind of explain or express your interests. The earlier you can reach out to kind of express your interests, the better. It's 1 year, you want it to be a very good year. You want to get everything you want to accomplish out of that year. And, the better you can kind of facilitate that early, the easier it just is going to be, because fellowship, I'm only 4 months in, and I feel like it's almost moved way too fast already. So if I didn't have a plan kind of going in, I'd be behind in terms of like, what are my goals for this year? So I think
Sonny, the only other thing I'll add to that is I'll just relate my experience. I was at PGY3 at Harvard at the time, and I started working on a paper as a PGY2. It got accepted to AOSSM. My mentors, Charlie Brown and some other people, they were my sponsor at the meeting. I went to the meeting. AOSM used to be a small meeting. I met all the fellowship directors. I met all the gurus. And before I knew it, they're like, oh, no, Dr. Fu was like, you come to my fellowship. You come with me. I like you. You PGY3, you come present at the Panther meeting next year. And so I think those exposures are really critical, too, of an intro, particularly for us. If you can get those exposures it's better if you're presenting a paper. However, there are some of these AOSS meetings just from the orthopedic, but I know hand, foot and ankle, everybody has these. It's really good exposure of just meeting people early on. Like one of our residents, Dwayne, just went to one of the foot and ankle meetings. He met the people at HSS. They kind of chubbed it up a little bit. And it's like, hey, we'd love to have you at our fellowship, so make sure you apply. And Dwayne's a 3. So I think you can start some of this stuff a little bit early. Obviously, that means you have to kind of make a decision what you're interested in doing. I think that can be a benefit going forward also, because now we're dealing with, particularly like in sports, as it's getting more competitive, we got people who are now going out and spending a week with Jimmy Andrews to say, hey, and you're just going down, you're observing him doing surgery so you can meet him. So all these types of things are going on behind the scenes now, and you need to be aware of all these types of things going on. I know some of the people are trying to make a trip just to stop through Rush just to meet Brian Cole. It's like, well, my mentor said I should meet you. So these are the things going on behind the scenes, and it's definitely a who's who and what's what. I think you did a great job of just kind of laying everything out in regards to how to approach this.
Yeah, Sonny, that was awesome. And just in the interest of full disclosure, for the, like, I had a similar trip. I know one of the current HSS fellows. He went down there to Andrews Institute, like you said. There were other people, so that is something I think that can kind of demonstrate your interest, and it does seem to make a difference. And Sonny, those were some amazing nuggets. I think we kind of interjected and asked a lot of questions. We're almost 30 minutes over, so we don't want to take everybody else. I know it's Sunday. We appreciate everybody. The OIT board prep, just because we're 30 minutes over, we're actually going to send those slides to everybody. Justin and I, we're going to do those. We appreciate this panel, the crazy insight from all of the physicians. Hassani, Dr. Ross, appreciate you chiming in too. Dr. Dacus, Dr. Fu, for Dr. Carson, and then Dr. Lipa. So thanks, everybody. Really do appreciate it.
So this is just to finish up. This is just the beginning. This is our inaugural residency assembly. We're going to be developing a further curriculum going forward, and further webinars and podcasts, and whatever insight or whatever opinions you have about how this went this evening, or even if you want to be more involved in residency assembly, we would really appreciate it. So we really want to grow this. This is an inaugural event. Josh and Justin, you did a phenomenal job of putting together a great faculty and everything. And I just want everybody to know that this is the first, and this is we're only going to get better after this.
Yeah, and I would also just say, honestly, to the speakers and the people who sent in questions, I learned a ton myself, for real. Like, it was, selfishly, some of the questions were my own. So really do appreciate you all doing this, for real. It means a lot. Thank you.
And thank you, Laurie, as well, putting everything together. Thank you, guys. We'll see you.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Everybody have a great evening, and thank you for participating.
Thanks, Dr. Carson. Appreciate it.